Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're taking a look at another release from XS Games for the original PlayStation that's a bit of an interesting case in the realm of shoot 'em ups. We're playing Soul Divide, developed and published by Psikyo, releasing to arcades in 1997 and receiving a port from XS Games to the PlayStation in 2002. This horizontal shooter is unique, and its approach to being a fusion of melee and range combat with a dash of medieval fantasy is quite the mix-up. Through a partially branching path of venture you'll slash and blast every enemy in sight, and it's got a few curves as far as what some might expect from developer Psikyo. But before we get into all that, let's check out the story. As an ongoing war for the Spirit Stone continues, three warriors set out to dash the ambitions of the evil King Eftar. You battle across the land of Silverna en route to the infamous Hell Island, where you'll face the king himself and the Kuromoa wizard in the last effort to save the land and reclaim the Spirit Stone. You have three characters, each with their own reasons and abilities to contribute, and they all have one thing in common: revenge. Gameplay wise, you've got a 6-stage horizontal shoot 'em up where you can either shoot your enemies or get in close and thrash them with your melee attacks. You can string melee attacks together for combos along with your chargeable meter for your spell abilities. There's several upgrades per character to extend your health and magic points, and the more spells you gather, the stronger your magic will be. These abilities stack each spell upgrade with various magic point costs to cast. Each character has a few common spells and a few unique spells they can cast, either showering the screen with fiery flames and bolts of lightning, to summoning deities to freeze time and space around you. There's a couple particularly devastating upgrades like the skull or nearly instant death spell that once used does exactly what it implies, either deleting your on-screen enemies or dealing near death amounts of damage. Catch is, some enemies will have counters to certain magic, and trial and error is going to be the best way to figure out what works best and for whom. Aside from the melee and magic aspect, you've got a horizontal shoot 'em up which has an arcade and original mode that will smoke you until you figure out optimal ways to cut through the ranks. While your life bar allows you to take multiple hits, some enemies can drain your health astoundingly fast, and dying will set you back to the beginning of a level if you use a continue. Your score will also be wiped per continue as well. The control on this version of the game is fairly tight, but your hitbox is also huge. You can get around the screen well enough, but know you're going to take a lot of damage, and a lot of times you'll go from 0 to dead until getting used to the controls. When defeating enemies, they'll drop health and magic recovery vials, so even if you're getting worked, you can usually get your health and magic back relatively quick. Speaking of quick, the first few stages are pretty short compared to the final two, each with multiple sections and boss encounters. Beyond the initial learning curve, once familiar, you can often clear Soul Divide in about 15 or so minutes. While it's got a good bit of action, it just goes by so fast. And being an XS Games port, there are parts missing, much like the Gunbird port they shipped as mobile life force for the PS1, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. Graphics wise, Soul Divide is a bit of a mixed bag with the visuals. The opening cutscenes actually look pretty sick with their early pre-rendered art style during the attract mode. Sprites have decent animations but have an overall chunky look to them. The smaller sprites more so have some pretty hard pixels, but the bigger sprites, especially the boss characters, do look pretty decent. The giant dinosaur head encounter in particular does look pretty gnarly, and the larger sprites usually aren't as rough on the eyes. Environments, however, do have a good bit of detail, and even at times having parallax scrolling in certain stages. The PS1 version does have some dial-back visuals compared to the arcade and current gen releases, and there's some missing animations and dialogue in the PS1 version, as well as no translation for any of the character endings. The hand-drawn artwork of the character models and the ending cinematics does have a bit of an Image Comics or almost Weapon Lord sort of art style to them, and these bits, while there's not much of them, do look pretty good. The magic abilities also have some nice visual flair, especially when using the freeze spell when you summon your deities to do their best Superman Ice Breath impression, temporarily freezing all enemies on screen. The Phoenix and Death spells were also particularly tight, since either a massive skeleton or blazing Phoenix fly into the screen, setting it ablaze while dropping massive damage, and the animations here are also pretty sick. In that regard, for the visuals that are kinda mid, there's some pretty interesting ones too to balance it out, aside from the at times chunky aesthetic during gameplay. Sound-wise is also a bit of a mixed bag, but mostly in a good way here. The soundtrack was the strongest aspect of Soul Divide and has some genuinely good compositions that have a heavy fantasy feel. Masasaki Izutani and Kenichi Hirata put together a really solid set of backing tunes, and the tracks fit the action pretty well. It's no wonder the music is so strong, considering Izutani composed and contributed to several Capcom and Psikyo soundtracks, and in short, the music here bangs. Only catch is the first 4 levels are pretty short, so you likely won't hear the bigger ends of those songs, but they are in there. Masasaki Izutani also did some of the music for Varth Operation Thunderstorm, so if nothing else, hearing the compositions is something to look forward to playing Soul Divide. Along with the light speech synth and mostly passable sound effects, it again balances things out in the audio department overall. In closing, Soul Divide is widely regarded as one of Psikyo's mid-releases amongst their pedigreed catalog, though after playing it numerous times, I gotta admit it's not the worst shoot 'em up I've ever played, but it does have some jank to it along with the bits that do work in its favor. It's a bit of a mixed bag, and the PlayStation version isn't the best port of this game or a shoot 'em up in general, but again, it's far from the worst. The honor goes to D-Force, but that's a story for a whole other day. There's some good in this package, but depending on how much you're into shoot 'em up games, mileage is certainly going to vary as far as enjoyment and replay value. Soul Divide gets a 7 out of 10 and comes recommended to shoot 'em up fans that are looking for something a little bit different, and more so those that can embrace and or ignore the jank that comes along with this port in particular. The current generation ports add a little bit bit more in the way of visual features and context, but the PlayStation version isn't quite the worst way to play it either, since this game is mostly intact with a couple of extras. It's just with everything it gets right, it falters in several other spots, excelling in some, but then just being kind of mid in others. It's also not the most challenging game either, so for those new to the genre, this might be a good introductory title to horizontal shoot 'em ups, but seasoned vets might not get as much out of it unless you're pursuing one credit clear runs, which are doable, sure, but that will likely be where the frustrations come in with the at times busted mechanics. You can still have fun with it, but once you complete it a few times, the novelty might wear off some. And I thank you again for checking out this video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use this as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future, but until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.